Hi, everybody. This brief lecture will be to provide context about the terminology that you will be encountering this week in your readings and help prepare you for your mini essay assignment that will be due on Sunday. The topic of this lecture is fake news and misinformation in the internet age. And generally speaking, the idea of, or the concept of fake news refers to the series of false or misleading information that is presented as factual news that we often encounter in social media and other internet spaces. Um, the intention of fake news or the broader concept of misinformation is to deceive the audience, right? And this deception is done for various means. Some characteristics of fake news is that it is easily debunked with a little bit of fact checking and a little bit of context, which is often void within social media platforms. It spreads rapidly, and it has a certain motivation. Typically, it's a political or financial motivation, but sometimes that can be a little bit murky of deciphering what that motivation is. So the concept of fake news is not new, though it has been popularized or proliferated in the last few years. Um, but the concept was actually first, not concept of fake news, but the concept of that there's a disconnected reality between public discourse and fact was first identified by a Greek historian named Thucydides, um, and it was about the Peloponnesian War, and he identified that the way that the war was talked about in the public square and in the discourse of the time was increasingly disconnected from the realities of that war, and kind of first identified that juxtaposition between reality and how things are proliferated within news spaces. Um, And then the podcast that we're going to listen to, the Hidden Brain podcast, it's a 30-minute podcast. We'll discuss how this idea of media framing, um, and especially in American media, has always been a sensational activity, and how it has created certain echo chambers throughout time, and how those echo chambers have led to real world consequences. The example that it looks at in detail is that of what was known as the yellow journalism era, which helped or was the catalyst for the Spanish American War in a lot of ways. So the podcast goes through a bunch of different examples and histories about sensational American journalism and how that kind of set the stage for our contemporary iterations of the fake news era. Um, and then, more recently, this term became much more prominent in 2016 at the inauguration of former President Donald Trump. And during this inauguration, it was pointed out through these aerial photography images that the attendance of the inauguration was much less than that of former President Obama's inauguration in 2008. Um, and even with this evidence, people in the Trump orbit claim that this was a fake news story, that the actual uh, number of people was superior, exceeded that of Obama's inauguration, despite there being evidence that demonstrated otherwise. And so this is when this idea of fake news kind of recirculated or became more popularized in the recent past. So quickly, one of the things I wanted to go over in this little mini lecture was just some of the different types of contemporary misinformation or fake news that we encounter and how they differ from one each other. These are all different facets of the same broader uh, ecosystem of how information is distributed on the internet and through social media. But I wanted to give just some variation or some different nuances to these different terms and how they differ from each other a little bit. So when you encounter them in your reading, you can have a better sense of what they mean. So confirmation bias. This is when people favor information that supports what they already believe. And so in this context, um, once when we see something that kind of already exists with our preconceived notions of politics or of social issues or of environmental issues or whatever, we're much more readily uh, or easily convinced of those when they already overlap with our existing belief system, right? And so even if the facts of that don't necessarily line up, we tend to overvalue or overemphasize or overindex this source of information or this flows of information that already align with our existing beliefs. So that's confirmation bias. Another term that we'll encounter is filter bubble, and this refers to how our results and our algorithms and our news feeds are personalized, right, by this series of network relations that we have and places that we often visit and kind of our search history and our uh, friend network and you know what we like and what we follow. That creates a certain kind of individualized algorithm or individualized set of stories that we encounter, and then things penetrating that are of different value or of different belief systems often have a hard time penetrating that bubble that we've created. And so this graphic here demonstrates kind of a network analysis of two different people's information bubble that they have kind of customized to them with that kind of simple kind of political dichotomy that we see with the red and blue visualization. And this just emphasizes that, we see a lot of the same things over and over again that kind of lead to that confirmation bias, and having things kind of penetrate that filter bubble is very difficult within these social media algorithms. Another term that we encounter is the term data void, and this refers to these different search queries that have few results, and then because of that, it makes it easy to push certain ideological agendas kind of within an emerging set of search queries. So an example of this is if we think about the beginning of the COVID pandemic, that there was very little searched about virology or about airborne viruses or about COVID or coronaviruses or about particular types of vaccines or whatever, for a long time. So there was this void of information filling up internet spaces about these topics, right? And then suddenly, with the onset of a new event, there became a sharp increase in the amount of searches for COVID related issues, right? And so in that void, there became a lot of room for new ideological agendas to be exploited. So that's a data void. Anytime there's kind of a new or an emerging thing that happens, that is one of the issues that it arises. Then we have the term post-truth, and this is really kind of relying on, if we think about rhetorical styles, a pathos-based rhetorical style that appeals to emotion, right? And so we see a lot of times where when there's a lack of scientific facts or a lack of like concrete findings, often emotional-based appeals will be used to deliver a certain type of message or point of view or reality forward, right? So we can think about an example of this is the lab leak theory for the COVID pandemic, right? And it's much easier to think that there's some sort of controlled, hidden governmental conspiracy that that is hiding the truth about this origin of the pandemic, as opposed to it being a random act in nature that we have no control over. And even though there's not really enough evidence on either side to make a conclusive argument about the origin of the pandemic or of the COVID pandemic, it's easier to kind of shape opinions in a certain way based on creating emotional or pathos-based reasonings. And then finally, propaganda. This is probably the one that we're most familiar with. This is biased or misleading information that's typically used to promote political or nationalistic or conspiratory points of view. This is often what we've seen, throughout time in posters and in memes and in things like that. So those are some different terms that we discussed. We'll leave it here. We're at the 10-minute mark, so I'll leave it here and set you forth on your reading for the weekly activities. All right, thanks. Talk to you later.